it is even more important to preserve history when history is being actively destroyed. Misinformation, false history about abortion was used in the overturning of Roe v. Wade. It is for this reason, and also because I believe that information is worth preserving, that we begin our course on Herbalism for AFAB Autonomy with the history of abortion timeline. Now, I've taught this timeline before. There's a version of it up on YouTube. It's just an older version. I've done more research since then. And a few years ago, I taught this course for the Sanctum seminary students, and that version has been getting posted to Patreon one a week for the last few months. So if you don't want to wait for the YouTube version to roll out, you can seek those out. Additionally, the entire timeline, which is about 90 pages, is available to patrons, but like the rest of the information for this course, if you would like me to just email you the notes, I will do so without you becoming a patron. You can send me an email at staff@sanctumofthecraft.org. Again, that's staff@sanctumofthecraft.org, and I will just send you the notes. Before we get started, I do want to note that this topic is intense. We're talking about the history of Herbalism for AFAB Autonomy. So it will discuss everything from rape to slavery to people being treated as property by their fathers, by their husbands, by the state, to people not having the ability to control their bodies and what happened to them, and being punished if they tried to. It will discuss infanticide, because that was often a concern. In some cases, it was what was recommended. Oh, if the abortion failed, you should commit infanticide. That was what the people aligned with the state power instructed. So this might be a very triggering class. Additionally, none of this should be taken as a recommendation, not only for legal reasons, but because a lot of the abortifacients and contraceptives that were used in the ancient world were deeply unsafe. And some of these things that we're going to get into were dangerous or disgusting, risk of infections, risk of hemorrhage, risk of death, and of course, risk of it just not working, we will get into the plants that have actually had clinical trials performed, or that have a long history of being efficacious. Of course, not as a matter of any kind of recommendation, but just as a matter of historical interest. But just because these are rattled off in the history does not mean that they are safe. And please don't use these. Okay. Last bit of a content warning. I will use in my writings the term pregnant person or AFAB person, and the term fetus, the term embryo, but the text that I'm quoting might say woman and might say infant and might say baby. So please keep that in mind. That's not my language, that's the language that I'm quoting. And if that's going to be harmful to you, well then don't engage with this content, and maybe skip the history sections. People have been regulating their fertility and performing abortions through chemical means throughout established history. Records of herbal abortions exist in our oldest medical records. This likely means that the practice is older than the records. From all surviving accounts, the ancient peoples of West Asia and Egypt did not believe that life began at conception, but rather at birth. All evidence supports that the ancients regarded a fetus as less than a person and more as property that belonged to the father of a family. A Sumerian law from circa 1800 BCE read, "If a man accidentally buffeted a woman of free citizen class and caused her to have a miscarriage, he must pay 10 shekels of silver. If a man deliberately struck a woman of free citizen class and caused her to have a miscarriage, he must pay 1/3 mina of silver." Hammurabi's laws from approximately 1728 BCE to 1686 BCE also gave the same recovery for one who caused a miscarriage. half of that, 5 shekels, for a miscarriage caused to a commoner, and a fine to slave owners of 2 shekels if he caused a slave to lose a fetus. In some cases, in Middle Assyrian law, if a citizen caused the wife of another citizen to miscarry, then that citizen could be forced to require their own wife to have an abortion, thus costing them equal property. This demonstrates that abortion was practiced in Assyria and could be ordered by a court. In Middle Assyria, if a blow struck upon a pregnant person was fatal to the pregnant person, the penalty was death, but the penalty wasn't death for the death of a fetus, with one exception. If the husband of the pregnant person who lost a fetus because of the blow had no son, then the deliverer of the blow might be put to death because they had endangered the property rights of the father. In Babylon, it was the same. If the harm to the pregnant person was not great, the penalty was not severe. The only punishment for the destruction of a fetus was a fine. Ancient Egyptian medicine dates at least as far back as 3000 BCE, although the Ebers Papyrus, which is the most famous of the medical texts, dates back to only 1500 BCE. There is an ongoing debate on the accuracy of the translations of ancient Egyptian medical texts, as translators lack complete knowledge of the Egyptian language. Current translations are composed of mere approximations between Egyptian and modern ideas, so it should not be assumed that any translation is completely accurate. 9 principal medical papyri are currently documented as having survived to be translated, at least in part. They are named after their original owners, Edwin Smith, Chester Beatty, and Carlsberg, the site of their discovery, Cahun, Ramesseum, and the towns where they were kept, Leiden, London, Berlin, or their editor, Ebers. The earliest medical writing from Egypt, the Cahun Gynecological Papyrus, which dates to circa 1850 and dealt with reproductive health, gynecological diseases, fertility, pregnancy, contraception, etc., had 3 fragmentary prescriptions for preventing conception, all involving vaginal suppositories. The first recipe called for crocodile feces. With the other ingredients and methods described in the fragments, it is assumed by modern historians that the contraceptive was constructed from feces, saltpeter, and a fermented dough. It is possible that the use of crocodile feces was due to the crocodile's association with the Egyptian god Seth. It was also used on ancient Egyptian uterine amulets for both opening the womb, thus assisting menstruation, conception, and birth, and for closing the womb, thus causing hemorrhaging, miscarriage, or abortion. The Ramesseum papyrus also contained the exact same formula using crocodile feces. Because the prescription is found in 2 unrelated texts, they both likely descend from an older and well-established practice. The aforementioned Ebers Papyrus, written circa 1550 BCE, represented a collection of earlier knowledge. The Ebers Papyrus is the longest of all the known papyri. It is complete to the modern day, totals 108 pages, and bears the date of the 9th year of the reign of Amenephis I, so 1550 BCE. It was a compilation of important and diverse Egyptian medical texts from the previous centuries, which allowed historians to establish that the practices it documents date back far further than the papyrus itself. The papyrus consists of more than 800 prescriptions and refers to 700 plant species and drugs used in ancient Egyptian medicine, such as pomegranate, castor oil plant, aloe, senna, garlic, onion, fig, willow, coriander, juniper, common centaury, cannabis, and mandrake. The herbs used by the ancient Egyptians included those grown locally in their region and those imported from Asia and from the Near Middle East. The Ebers Medical Papyrus detailed an herbal abortifacient, the beginning of recipes that are made for women to use a woman to stop pregnancy in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd period trimester, unripe fruit of acacia, colocynth, dates, triturate with a 6/7 pint of honey, moisten a pessary of plant fiber, and place in vagina. The acacia was likely one of the species of acacia common in Egypt at the time, most likely Acacia nilotic. The colocynth was most likely Citrullus coloquinthus, which is the same plant that Dioscorides, who we will get to eventually, recommended also as a vaginal suppository. The Ebers Papyrus also documented a large number of prescriptions for loosening or stipping off and discarding or setting aside in the list of substances that are known abortifacients, which likely implied that these words were terms or euphemisms used for abortions. The first recipe in the series of prescriptions for the purpose of loosening or stripping off or discarding or setting aside was for a fumigant, a chemical that produces fumes used to affect an area. It was made from a Lower Egyptian salt, emmer seeds, and a plant called this in Egyptian. I don't know how to pronounce that. The other recipes in the sequence were taken orally or applied topically rather than used as fumigants. I'm just going to put some recipes up on the screen, as I do not know how to pronounce some of these words. I move on. Much later, Dioscorides also used some of these ingredients, onions, juniper, and pine, as abortifacients. The unknown beetle in these recipes might be an early use of Cantharides, also called Spanish fly. The beans may have been Phaseolus vulgaris, or closely related, another abortifacient due to the 4 estrogenic substances that are found in the flowering beans, leaves, and stems. A very early mention of oral contraceptives was made in the Berlin Medical Papyrus, which dates to the 19th century, circa 1300 BCE. The text is fragmentary and states, emissions of semen, a woman without becoming pregnant, you should fumigate her vagina with emmer seeds to prevent her receiving the semen, then you should make for her a prescription to loosen the semen, oil, 5 parts celery, 5 parts sweet beer, heat and drink for 4 mornings. In Hebrew texts compiled from 900 BCE to 220 CE, the fetus was not treated as a living being until birth. One passage in the Mishnah Oholoth dealt with the dismemberment of a fetus during a breech birth, in which it permitted the procedure provided the fetus was not over half immersed and disallowed the procedure if it had. In multiple places, the Talmud referred to the fetus as part of the mother, as similar later Roman ideology did with pars viscerum matris. The Greek Stoics, who had an enormous influence on early Christian thought, believed that the soul came when the fetus was exposed to cool air, although the potential was present at conception. This divided the Greeks on the subject of abortion. Hippocrates of Kos, often referred to as the father of medicine due to his contributions to the Western system of medicine, as he developed many of the techniques of prognosis and clinical observation and the systematic categorization of diseases that became the foundation of European medicine for thousands of years, wrote about abortion. The earliest explicit instruction commonly known to exist in Greek medical texts on oral contraceptives is found in 2 of the Hippocratic treatises. In On the Nature of Women, Hippocrates stated, if a woman does not wish to become pregnant, give to her in a drink of water moistened copper ore in the amount of a vicia bean, and she will not become pregnant for a year. In Diseases of Women, Hippocrates gave very similar instructions again. Contraceptive. If a woman does not want to be pregnant, moistened copper ore as much as a vicia bean in water and have her drink it. For a year, thereabouts, she does not get pregnant. Missy is a copper compound, probably an ore, possibly a copper sulfate. Dioscorides also described it and cited that it came from Cyprus, though he did not list it as an anti-fertility agent. Galen, who we will touch on more later, also wrote on its use in salves, but again did not record its use as an anti-fertility agent. In the known works of antiquity through the Middle Ages, Missy was not recommended again as an anti-fertility agent until the works of Aetius of Amida, so the mid-5th century to the mid-6th century, the Byzantine Greek physician and medical writer. In the same Hippocratic treatise, Diseases of Women, there are several recorded abortifacients, most of which are vaginal suppositories. An efficacious pessary, which expels the afterbirth and draws down the menstrua and the crippled embryo or fetus. Remove wings, leg, and head from 5 cantharine beetles. Next, bruise the leaves and roots of the small caltrop, a shell amount of the crushed hard outer of the boanthum themon, a shell amount of celery seed, 15 cuttlefish eggs, mix in sweet wine, and insert. Almost exactly the same recipe was listed a second time in the same treatise, but rather than being used to release a crippled embryo or fetus, it released the half-completed embryo or fetus. The cantharine, again, was a drug obtained from the Cantharidis beetle, also called Spanish fly, and appeared in the aforementioned Ebers Papyrus. The celery seed was used in the aforementioned Berlin Papyrus. The same treatise contained a recipe explicitly labeled uterine abortive. The recipe made use of the squirting cucumber, which the author described, saying there is nothing better for use as an herbal abortifacient. Squirting cucumber was one of the most popular herbal abortifacients from this period all the way through to the Renaissance. In the same treatise, Disease of Women, following these recipes are 9 more. The first is listed as an agent for testing, and the others with no label for their use but another, all of which contain herbal abortifacients. 1. A head of boiled garlic as a suppository. 2. A scorpion of the sea on a wool pad. 3. Cantharine beetle. 4. Bulb, possibly Narcissus. 5. Lees of white wine. 6. Galbanum. Soda, copper ore with myrtle rose applied on a linen pad. 7. Elaterium in double amounts, honey and wine on linen pad. 8. Butter and alum on coarse flax. And 9. Scammony juice, animal fat, barley meal, and wine applied on a linen pad. In the same Hippocratic treatise, Diseases of Women, there are also several herbal abortifacients specifically listed as other abortives or uterine abortives, which were to be taken as oral abortifacients, often with wine or water. 1. Another abortifacient. Shake her under the armpits and give her to drink the petals of the chaste tree in wine, or grind an obol of Cretan dittany, or a handful of spikenard and leek juice with a large shell of oil of bitter almonds. 2. Another. Take a decoction of pine and sweet wine and add 3 obols galbanum and myrtle. 3. Or another. A decoction of leek juice, myrtle, and sweet wine mixed together. 4. Or grind down purslane given with a double amount of white wine. 5. Or 9 seeds of black poplar from Crete, ground, boiled in wine. 6. Or buttercup leaves and flowers, ground, boiled with aginatin drachma of sweet wine. And another. Potent uterine abortifacient, the roots of sweet earth almond that is like a bulb, small like an olive, and let her drink it. If small, 2 are needed, if not 1 will do. Mix together some seeds of an Ethiopian cumin, Massilian heartwort, dried Libyan leaves, with 3 cottles of wine, boil down to a half and let her drink this. In On Generation, a work attributed to Hippocrates, the author stated, when a woman has intercourse, if she is not going to conceive, then it is her practice to expel the sperm from both partners whenever she wishes to do so. The Hippocratic school of medicine, based on his work, completely altered the structure of ancient Greek medicine, foremostly by establishing it as a discipline distinct from other fields with which it had traditionally been associated, naturalism, theurgy, and philosophy. Compared to other Greek physicians of his time who believed that disease came from the gods, Hippocrates viewed the body as an integrated whole, dictated by the laws of nature. He believed that the body could be treated with medicine and not just with prayer, which shifted much of the course of Western medicine. Hippocrates is also credited with collecting and summarizing the medical knowledge of previous schools of medicine in the ancient world, much of which became part of the Hippocratic corpus. But Hippocrates himself did not write the corpus. It is pseudo-epigraphically attributed to him. It should be noted that the works and methods of the writers of the Hippocratic corpus, created by the practitioners of Hippocratic medicine, and the actions of Hippocrates himself were and often are conflated. Unfortunately, the work of Hippocrates himself is blurred into and difficult to separate from the overarching Hippocratic corpus. Hippocrates is often credited with coining the Hippocratic Oath, which is still relevant and in use today. It is perhaps the most widely known of the Greek medical texts. However, Hippocrates did not write the oath. However, many versions of the oath survive to modern times in fragments that do not all match one another. The oath has a new physician swear upon various gods associated with healing that they will uphold a number of professional ethical standards. It also strongly bonds the relationship between the teacher, the student, and the greater community of physicians in a way that resembles the bonds of a family. The oath may have inspired the stages of medical apprenticeship and the strict bounds of loyalty that were used by physicians of other schools in the ancient world outside of the system of Hippocratic medicine, such as the Asclepiads of Kos. Much of the oath is misunderstood in popular consciousness. For one, the oath has not remained the same since its creation. Over the centuries, it has been rewritten to suit the culture and values of the region it is used in. For another, the Hippocratic Oath is not required by most modern medical schools, although some have adopted modern versions that have been altered to suit modern medical philosophy. And lastly, it does not explicitly contain the phrase, "First, do no harm," which is commonly attributed to it. The Hippocratic Oath, as translated by Michael North, National Library of Medicine, 2002. I swear by Apollo the physician, and Asclepius, and Hygeia, and Panacea, and all the gods and goddesses as my witnesses, that according to my ability and judgment I will keep this oath and this contract, to hold him who taught me this art equally dear to me as my parents, to be a partner in life with him, and to fulfill his needs when required, to look upon his offsprings as equal to my own siblings, and to teach them this art if they shall wish to learn it, without fee or contract, and that by the set rules, lectures, and every other mode of instruction, I will impart a knowledge of the art to my own sons and those of my teachers, and to students bound by this contract, and having sworn this oath to the law of medicine, but to no others. I will use those dietary regimens which will benefit my patients according to my greatest ability and judgment, and I will do no harm or injustice to them. I will not give a lethal drug to anyone if I am asked, nor will I advise such a plan, and similarly I will not give a woman a pessary to cause an abortion. In purity and according to divine will, I will carry out my life and my art. I will not use the knife even upon those suffering from stones, but I will leave this to those who are trained in this craft. Into whatever homes I go, I will enter them for the benefit of the sick, avoiding any voluntary act of impropriety or corruption, including the seduction of women or men, whether they are free men or slaves. Whatever I see or hear in the lives of my patients, whether in connection with my professional practice or not, which ought not to be spoken of outside, I will keep secret, as considering of such things to be private. So long as I maintain this oath faithfully and without corruption, may it be granted for me to partake of life fully, and the practice of my art, gaining the respect of all men for all time. However, should I transgress this oath and violate it, may the opposite be my fate. The well-known line from the Hippocratic Oath regarding abortion was generally not followed by ancient physicians. It is entirely possible that they did not make use of copies that contained it, as it is in only one of the surviving copies of the oath, and it's absent from all of the other surviving copies. The oath also does not prohibit someone who swore to it from providing an abortion, but only from using an abortive vaginal suppository, also called a pessary. It doesn't swear off any other form of contraception or abortion, only pessaries, which can be very dangerous. So Hippocrates did not write the oath. Most versions do not contain the portion on not providing abortive pessaries, and the version that does contain a portion forbidding abortive pessaries doesn't contain any other forbidding of any other form of abortion or contraception. And additionally, Hippocrates recorded multiple recipes for abortive remedies in his own works, not the things that were pseudo-epigraphically attributed to him. It's actually a myth, by the way, that doctors still swear to this oath. They don't. I'm not sure why that myth persists, that it is not the case. So even if doctors were to swear, it still doesn't make any sense the way that it's falsely stated that Hippocrates did not allow for abortions. Yes, he did. Okay. Plato, the Greek who founded the Plotinus school of thought and the Academy, in his Republic, wrote around 360 BCE, recorded a fictional conversation between Socrates and various others about what constitutes justice. In it is argued that justice is when a person does what is best for the interests of the state. In Book 5 of the Republic, in a discussion about childbearing, the fictionalized Socrates recommended a kind of eugenics, where certain fetuses should not be allowed to be born or should be killed after birth. The principle has been already laid down that the best of either sex should be united with the best as often, and the inferior with the inferior as seldom as possible, and that they should rear the offspring of the one sort of union, but not of the other, if the flock is to be maintained in first-rate condition. And I think that our braver and better youth, besides their other honors and rewards, might have greater facilities of intercourse with women given them. Their bravery will be a reason, and such fathers ought to have as many sons as possible. A woman, I said, at 20 years of age may begin to bear children to the state, and continue to bear them until 40. A man may begin at 25, when he has passed the point at which the pulse of life beats quickest, and continue to beget children until he be 55. A man may not marry his daughter, or his daughter's daughter, or his mother, or his mother's mothers, and women, on the other hand, are prohibited from marrying their sons or fathers, or son's son or father's father, and so in either direction. And we grant all this, accompanying the permission with strict orders to prevent any embryo which may come into being from seeing the light, and if any force away to the birth, the parents must understand that the offspring of such a union cannot be maintained, and arranged accordingly. So some of the Greek philosophers favored eugenics, but did not disagree with abortion, and in some cases approved of infanticide. Plato also recorded a conversation he had witnessed between Socrates and a student. It is important to note that Socrates' mother, Phanerete, was a midwife. Socrates, it is not then also more likely and even necessary that midwives should know better than anyone else who are pregnant and who are not? And the student answered, certainly. And Socrates said, and furthermore, the midwives, by means of drugs and incantations, are able to arouse the pangs of labor, and if they wish, to bear who have difficulty in bearing, and they cause miscarriages if they think that they are desirable. And his student answered, true. In Plato's myth of air, the main character states that after the events of a person's next life are chosen, the souls are carried up to their births, which demonstrates that Plato believed a soul was not present in the fetus until the moment of birth when it enters the body. Aristotle, a student of Plato and a Greek philosopher and polymath, wrote in his Polythesis, Book 7, which was written in approximately 350 BCE, that laws should be made promoting abortion and the exposure of newborn children in order to limit the number of children with deformities and to prevent overpopulation. However, he made a distinction between lawful and unlawful abortions and exposures. As to exposing or rearing the children born, let there be a law that no deformed child shall be reared, but on the ground of number of children, if the regular customs hinder any of those born being exposed, there must be a limit fixed to the procreation of offspring, and if any people have a child as a result of intercourse in contravention of these regulations, abortion must be practiced on it before it has developed sensation and life, for the line between lawful and unlawful abortion will be marked by the fact of having sensation and being alive. Aristotle provided further information on his perspective on abortion in his History of Animals, in which he stated that male fetuses were formed by the 40th day after conception and females by the 90th day after conception, and that abortion performed after these time periods were of a fetus with distinct parts that could be observed to be a fetus. He seemed to have supported abortion before that period. Both Greek and Roman law did not protect the fetus, but there was a religious distinction made at the point when the fetus had formed recognizable features. Before that point, the pregnant person could either contracept or abort without religious or legal sanction, although there were cases where the impregnating person had some legal interest in the decision. There were also cases in Rome where a physician or pharmakos who gave pharmakeia, drugs, was denounced and at times legally punished, or so said the law, for a procedure that resulted in harm to the pregnant person. The same was true in medieval Islam and to some degree in Christian society through the Middle Ages. So in this case it was, you performed an abortion, but you hurt the pregnant person because you didn't do it correctly and you're being penalized for that. The Septuagint, the earliest extant Greek translation of books from the Hebrew Tanakh, was created when more Greeks were living in Alexandria and Egypt than in any other city on the Greek mainland, and Alexandria had more Jewish people than Jerusalem. As many of the Alexandrian Jewish people spoke and read only Greek, there needed to be a Greek translation of their holy texts. During the 3rd century, 70 scholars made a translation that included the passage from Exodus, which altered the course of history in regards to the abortion debate. It was translated to mean that if a man struck a pregnant person who was pregnant and the child came out but was not yet fully formed, he would be forced to pay a fine. But if the child came out fully formed, then he would have to give life for life and an eye for an eye. The Greek word selected for the Hebrew word nephresh, meaning life, was psyche, meaning soul. The implication was that an unformed fetus had no soul, but a fully formed one did. This echoed the aforementioned perspective of Aristotle, which was common among the ancient Greeks, and this perspective shifted medieval thought. An inscription found at Cyrene, dating to 331 to 336 BCE, declared that a pregnant person who aborted a fetus with distinct features had incurred an impurity, whereas a person who aborted one whose features were indistinct or unformed had incurred no pollution. The earliest known court case on abortion rights in Rome was cited by Cicero, who referred to a Milesian woman who had received bribes from alternative heirs in order to secure for herself an abortion through drugs for which she was sentenced to death. However, this was due to the fact that the pregnant woman had interfered with inheritance law and was invoked as a precedent for cases in which pregnant persons were purposefully depriving their former husband of heirs. Philo of Alexandria, the Hellenistic Jewish philosopher who lived in Alexandria, wrote a commentary on the Exodus passage in which he stated, "If the fetus already shaped and all the limbs have their proper qualities, he who delivered the blow must die." Pliny the Elder, the learned and eclectic Roman who authored the large Encyclopedia Naturalis Historia, wrote that he was reluctant to write down birth control information. He discussed causes and preventives of abortion, the morality of abortion, various contraceptives, amenagogues, and abortifacients. Pregnant women, on the other hand, are in the greatest danger during the 4th and 8th month, and abortions during these periods are fatal. And abortion ensues if the female should happen to sneeze just after the sexual congress. It is a subject for pity and even for a feeling of shame when one reflects that the origin of the most vain of all animated beings is thus frail, so much so indeed that very often the smell even of a lamp just extinguished is the cause of abortion. A child used to be called Vopiscus, who, when twins had been conceived, had been retained in the womb and born alive, the other having perished by abortion. There are, too, some very remarkable instances of this kind, although they are singularly rare and uncommon. The only one among the bipods that is viviparous is man. Man is the only animal that repents of his first embraces, sad augury, indeed, of life, that its very origin should thus cause repentance. Other animals have stated times in the year for their embraces, but man, as we have already observed, employs for this purpose all hours, both of day and night. Other animals become sated with venereal pleasures. Man hardly knows any satiety. Messalina, the wife of Claudius Caesar, thinking this is a palm quite worthy of an empress, selected for the purpose of deciding the question one of the most notorious of the women who followed the profession of a hired prostitute, and the empress outdid her, after continuous intercourse night and day, at the 25th embrace. And the human race also, the men have devised various substitutes for the more legitimate exercise of passion, all of which outrage nature, while the females have recourse to abortion. How much more guilty than the brute beasts are we in this respect? Hesiod had stated that men are more lustful in winter and women in summer. A third kind, also known as a phalangium, is a spider with a hairy body and the head of enormous size. When opened, there are found in it 2 small worms, they say. These attached to a piece of deer's skin before sunrise to a mulwoman's body will prevent conception. The ashes of a burnt porcupinal taken in drink are preventative of abortion. Bitch's milk facilitates delivery, and the afterbirth of a bitch, provided it has not touched the ground, will act as an expellant of the fetus. Milk taken as a drink strengthens the loin of women when in travail. Mouse dung diluted with rainwater reduces the breasts of females when swollen after delivery. The ashes of a burnt hedgehog applied with oil act as a preventative of abortion. If pregnant woman steps over a viper, she will be sure to miscarry. The waters of Thespiae ensure conception to females, the same too with those of the river Elatus in Arcadia. The spring Linus, also in Arcadia, acts as a preservative of the fetus and effectually prevents abortion. The waters of the river Aphrodisias, on the other hand, in the territory of Pyrrhesea, are productive of sterility. While writing about a spider, known as a phalangium and worn as an amulet, he remarked that the phalangium is only one of all of the contraceptives. This only would be right for me to mention to help those women who are so prolific that they stand in need of such a respite. Regarding the use of juniper, he said, gossip records a miracle that to rub it all over the male part before coitus prevents conception. And about rue, he said, pregnant women must take care to exclude rue from their diet, or I find that the fetus is killed by it. Pliny also described parsley as sterilisco, as in that it caused some degree of sterility, as well as 2 ferns of uncertain species identification, known as asplanon and felix, as sterilatum facit, meaning it causes sterility, likely referring to their use as contraceptives. Dioscorides also listed asplanon as a contraceptive. It may be Asplenium adiantum nigrum, which has contraceptive properties. Felix may reference Dryopteris felix mas shot, taken in Hungary as a contraceptive. Another possible identification for this fern is Adiantum capillus, which in clinical studies performed on rats was found to act as an active inhibitor of postcoital implantation. Pliny also related amenagogues that he also stated expelled a dead fetus. These included rue, cabbage stalks, mint, pennyroyal, holwort, thyme, silphium, sage, galbanum, lesser century plant, dittany, birthwort, mandrake, artemisia, wormwood, Queen Anne's lace, myrrh, pepper, opoponix, chicory, chamomile, ground pine, and false dittany. Most of the plants listed by Pliny as amenagogues were for oral administration, although a few were used as suppositories. Scammony was listed for both methods, and scammony was taken both ways. Pliny did list some explicit abortifacients, including rue, wild mint, pennycress, squirting cucumber, mallow, hullwort, ground pine, arum, and the fern felix, as well as the genus Cyperus. Watermint, Pliny stated, should not be eaten by pregnant women unless the fetus be dead, since even one application of it produces abortion. Many of the ones that Pliny recorded as amenagogues and abortifacients we will be covering in this course, because some of them absolutely did act as amenagogues and abortifacients. Pedanius Dioscorides, a Greek physician, pharmacologist, botanist, and author of De Materia Medica, a 5-volume Greek encyclopedia on herbal and related medicines, recorded one recipe for an abortion wine, which made use of either white hellebore or black hellebore, along with squirting cucumber and scammony, but he failed to provide the precise manner in which it was to be prepared. There is more information on Dioscorides' recipe for abortion wine in the sections that we get to on medicinal uses. Dioscorides prescribed multiple oral contraceptives, including white poplar, cabbage flowers, pepper, ivy, asplanon, the aforementioned fern. He also claimed that the chaste tree destroyed generation as well as provokes menstruation. He also referenced the leaves of the white willow tree. He claimed the roots of the alpine plant called barrenwort acted as contraceptive, and its leaves, beaten and drunk in the amount of 5 drachmas in wine after the menstruation period for 5 days, preserved a state counter to conception. He also prescribed contraceptives in the form of herbal vaginal suppositories, including juniper berries, to be crushed and put on the penis or the vulva before insertion. He also described the use of cabbage flowers, pepper, and ivy as vaginal suppositories, and claimed they worked as abortifacients in both oral and suppository administrations. He also listed a large number of plants as abortifacients, many of which are clinically shown to act as early-stage abortifacients. Lupine, Dioscorides claimed, extracted menses. Dioscorides claimed that silphium, drunk with pepper and myrrh, moved menstrua. He claimed that birthwort, drunk with pepper and myrrh, expelled the menstrua and embryo or fetus. He claimed the same recipe also worked as a suppository. He claimed the fern, Thelopteris, caused a miscarriage, and claimed that Rete arum aborted a newly conceived fetus. He claimed that opoponics acted by expelling the menstrua and killing the fetus, that myrrh expelled the menstrua and fetus when administered with wormwood, lupine and rue, and that leucoion is an amenagogue and abortifacient. Dioscorides also recommended the use of black hellebore as a suppository for abortion. However, this is emphatically not recommended, not only due to hellebore's known irritating and ulcerating qualities, but because it wouldn't be effective to cause an abortion. A lot of these wouldn't be effective to cause an abortion. See the trigger warning at the beginning of the class. Dio Chrysostom, also called Dion of Prusa, was a Greek orator, writer, philosopher, and historian of the Roman Empire in the 1st century CE. In his discourses in the 15th discourse on slavery and freedom, he described how slaves who had been raped by their masters and become pregnant sought to get abortions in secret. But in the case of slave women, on the other hand, some destroy the child before birth and others afterwards, if they can do so without being caught, and yet sometimes even with the connivance of their husband, that they may not be involved in trouble by being compelled to raise children in addition to their having to endure slavery. Flavius Josephus, a 1st century Romano-Jewish historian and military leader, expressed 2 opinions on the Exodus passage. Reading the Hebrew, not the Greek, he focused on the Hebrew root ason, meaning harm, and argued that the meaning applied to the pregnant person and not to the fetus. If the pregnant person was not harmed, then the harm was done in depriving society of a potential person, and a fine would be amassed. If the pregnant person was fatally harmed, then the crime was punishable by death. However, in another work on Judaism, Josephus wrote a contradictory perspective. The law orders all of the offspring to be brought up and forbids women either to abort or to do away with a fetus. But if she is convicted, she is viewed as guilty of an infanticide because she destroys a soul and diminishes the race. Galen of Pergamum, a Greek physician practicing in Rome, wrote extensively on herbs and their properties. After Rome had conquered Greece in 146 BCE, many of the classical Greek medicinal texts, including the Hippocratic Corpus, had fallen into disuse or been suppressed. Roman medicine was largely magic and deity-based. In his work on therapeutics, Galen outlined the merging of disciplines within medicine to better address the needs of each individual person and their unique health problems. Galen further developed the 4 humor system that Hippocrates created by adding the idea of physis and pneuma. which encompassed the life force, spirit, and breath that infused all living beings in Hellenic belief systems. Galen also established the Western system of anatomy. In On Natural Faculties, Book 3, Part 12, Galen stated, "Now, abortifacient drugs or certain other conditions which destroy the embryo or rupture certain of its membranes are followed by abortion, and similarly also when the uterus is in pain from being in a bad state of tension, and, as has been said well by Hippocrates, excessive movement on the part of the embryo itself brings on labor." He described a number of abortifacient prescriptions. Most of them were vaginal suppositories. He named only 3 oral contraceptives. One is unidentified, and the other 2 are barrenwort and juniper, the latter of which he said was both a contraceptive and an abortifacient. Among the abortifacients named by Galen were lupin, death carrot, 2 juniper species, wallflower or stock, great century, cyclamen, golden drop, squirting cucumber, myrrh, woundwort pepper, opoponix, the fern known as tyrus, and calamint as an abortifacient. Galen listed pennyroyal only as an emmenagogue. Galen recorded a number of compound prescriptions for abortions that contain pepper, parsley, rue, juniper, artemisia, aloe, opoponix, and mandrake. One recipe contained 24 ingredients and was described as being taken to fully expel a fetus or embryo without pain. In his treatise on simple drugs according to temperaments and faculties, Galen did not specifically say that willow was an abortifacient or anti-fertility agent, but in his work on compound medicines according to Sight, Galen listed 2 emmenagogue prescriptions, one with willow and rue, and one with willow, rue, ginger, and date palm. One oral root prescription for abortion contained pepper, birthwort, and rue. In non-pharmacological medical treatises, Galen discussed the harm to the pregnant person that is done by taking abortifacient and emmenagogic preparations, especially after the beginning of the 2nd trimester. It is interesting to note that during this period, Greek and Latin early church figures who were vocally against abortion did not invoke Hippocrates to support their perspective. On the contrary, Tertullian, also called Quintus Septimius Florens Tertullianus, a prolific early Christian author who has been called the father of Latin Christianity and the founder of Western theology, accused Hippocrates of possessing a brutal surgical instrument used to dismember a fetus for abortion. Septimius Severus, who was Roman emperor from 193 to 211 CE, decreed that a woman who procured an abortion for herself should be sent into temporary exile by the governor, for it would appear shameful that she could with impunity deprive her husband of children. In both late non-Christian Roman law and early Roman Christian law, one principle invoked was the defense against magic. Those who gave maleficia, evil deeds, were held legally responsible for malpractice, should harm to life or property be incurred. Paulus, one of the most influential and distinguished Roman jurists and praetorian prefect under the Roman Emperor Alexander Severus, wrote in his sentences, "Those who administer a beverage for the purpose of producing abortion or for causing affection, although they may not do so with malicious intent, still, because their act offers a bad example, shall, if of humble rank, be sent to the mines, or if higher in degree, shall be relegated to an island with the loss of a portion of their property. If a man or woman should lose his or her life through such an act, the guilty party shall undergo the extreme penalty." Soranus of Ephesus, a Greek physician and one of the chief representatives of the Methodic school of medicine, wrote a 4-volume treatise on gynecology, in which he distinguished between contraceptives and abortifacients. He had a number of prescriptions for birth control, including both vaginal suppositories and oral contraceptives. He concluded that contraceptives were preferable to abortifacients, and Soranus recommended 4 oral contraceptives, but warned, "These things not only prevent conception, but also destroy any already existing. In our opinion, moreover, the evil from these things is too great, since they damage and upset the stomach, and besides cause congestion of the head and induce sympathetic reactions." Soranus specifically cited the Hippocratic Oath and believed that it meant it stated, "I will give to no one an abortive," which Soranus interpreted as Hippocrates referring to drug-induced abortions. He believed that Hippocrates permitted abortion by manipulation, such as in the treatise On the Nature of the Child that is attributed to Hippocrates, in which the author advocated for the so-called Lacedaemonian leap, that is, leaping with the heels to the buttocks for the sake of expulsion. Soranus was aware that Hippocrates wrote the instructions for various herbal abortifacients down. One such recipe, a vaginal suppository, Soranus said he had employed and could be taken to abort with relatively little danger. Serenus recognized that early abortions, those within the first 30 days after conception, were relatively safe and easy, and he said that one should merely follow the opposite regimen of procedures, exercises, and diet that he gave to patients to instruct them on how to avoid a miscarriage. Another late Roman author also supported the right to abortion. Quintus Serenus said that when the pregnancy was less than 8 months and the fetus was weak, one should rush into the bedroom and give to the pregnant person pennyroyal and tepid water. He also claimed that a mixture of egg, rue, and dill in a vaginal suppository was a good abortifacient. The aforementioned abortion case by Cicero was cited in the Digest once by the great jurist Ulpian and by Tryphonius, who invoked the precedent but added that if a pregnant woman after a divorce should commit a violent act upon her insides because she wanted an abortion so as to not give a son to her husband who is now hateful to her, she ought to be punished by temporary exile, as was stated by our most excellent emperors in a rescript. Tryphonius was likely citing the ruling of Septimius Severus. These shifting attitudes in late non-Christian Rome and early Christianized Rome towards perceiving the fetus as the husband's property and the abortifacients used to end them as evil magic influenced later anti-abortion movements in the Middle Ages that targeted midwives and witches, and midwives as witches, and midwives who were accused of being witches who weren't witches. So yeah, let me know in the comments which of these you found the most off-putting and disturbing. The Neoplatonic philosopher Porphyry wrote a letter to his friend Gowrus. The doctrine relating to the entry of souls into bodies in view of the production of a living being has filled us with extreme uncertainty. Well then, supposing one has shown that the embryo is neither a living thing in reality, nor a living thing in potentiality, then it becomes easy to establish the entry of the soul and the precise moment of that entry, namely that which must happen after the child is born outside the womb. On the other hand, if the embryo is potentially a living thing, if the sense that it has received the soul, or moreover, it is not at least without a great deal of mistrust that one will accept this moment, so that should be the occasion arise, one should note with precision what it was, for one may well define it at the moment when the sperm has been injected into the womb, as if the sperm could not be retained in the womb and become fertile unless the soul having come from the outside has been realized. Or one may place the moment of the entry of the soul at the first formation of the embryo, or one may assign the entry to the moment at which the embryo had begun to move. Greek medical author and physician Oribasius wrote extensively in his synopsis on the use of herbs for stimulating menstruation, preventing conception, and causing abortion. Amongst the emmenagogues he listed, which included common juniper, savin juniper, iris, pennyroyal, calamint, spignal, rue, horned poppy, dittany, acidorum, costus, cassia, and birthwort, were oils from the cypress, storax, wormwood, artemisia, and black hellebore. He documented one recipe of fern root and willow leaves to be drunk after coitus. In the section devoted to simple drugs, Oribasius identified wallflower and squirting cucumber as emmenagogues and abortifacients. He referred to birthwort and germander as menstrual regulators, but said that juniper was both a contraceptive and an abortifacient. He referred to ploughman's spikenard, germander, and myrrh as abortifacients, and he said that willow leaves drunk with wine caused barrenness, and cabbage flowers do the same. As vaginal suppositories, Oribasius recommended artemisia, dittany, cabbage juice, peony, leek or garlic, rue, and scammony. Intriguingly, Oribasius also named a contraceptive that could be applied to the penis rather than the vagina, axweed. He claimed that rubbing the juice on the penis prior to insertion into a vagina prevented conception. Gregory of Nyssa, the bishop of Nyssa in Cappadocia, who is venerated as a saint in Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, Oriental Orthodoxy, Anglicanism, and Lutheranism, explicitly wrote that the unformed embryo could not be considered a human being. We are going to pick up next time on how the perception of sex and abortion shifted as the late Roman antiquity ended and the early Middle Ages began, specifically the early Christian Middle Ages, and how the definition of fornication shifted and the debates continued as to when exactly the fetus became more than a clump of cells, and when exactly a person is considered to have gained a soul, whether it was at the moment of birth, the moment of something called the quickening, etc. All right. I'm trying to think of something to say other than please remember to like and subscribe, so instead I'll say, what was the weirdest one to you? Was it the inserted crocodile dung, or was it one of the others that you're like, why did people think that that caused an abortion?